This is an interview with David Teece, the author of the 1986 paper Profiting from Innovation, which he notes is the most cited paper in technology strategy and helped frame why investors so often miss the pot of gold. He's also known for developing the dynamic capabilities framework, sensing, seizing, and transforming, and for popularizing the idea of complementary assets. The partners and systems innovation need to actually win in the market. You can read more about David Teece on our website, 6degrees.blog, and our Instagram page, 6 Degrees Away. Thank you and enjoy the interview.
What first drew you into the economics of innovation and strategy? Which mentors or real-world puzzles shaped your early thinking? And what did you underestimate then that still influences your work on profiting from innovation and dynamic capabilities?
Well, what got me interested in it was being a graduate student in the United States and having the good luck. This is in the early 70s of actually having a professor that knew something about innovation from an economics point of view. I think there were probably only half a dozen scholars on innovation back then, and one of them was called Ed Mansfield. If he'd lived longer, I think he would have gotten the Nobel Prize in economics. But he was the first person to systematically study industrial research. And back in those days, when you talked innovation, it was coming mainly out of large companies. So looking at the industrial research establishment was what people focused on. And that got me interested in the topic. But at the same time, I was also fascinated by the fact that the British had come up with so many great inventions, from nuclear power application for electricity generation, they're amongst the first, to the Comet, the first civilian jet airliner, to hovercraft, to the body scanner, in radiology. But it sort of failed to successfully commercialize them. And it was America that was doing a good job of commercializing technology, and Britain was inventing everything, and we were commercializing it. And it struck me that there's this gap between who the pioneers are and who gets the pot of gold. And that led to this paper in '86 called Profiting from Innovation, which happens to be the most cited paper in the field of technology strategy. And it's still living strong. Which is, I guess, it's a good statement about the paper, but a bad statement about the field, that they can't tip it over with something better. And unlocking those puzzles, I didn't get all the way home, of course, but was able to frame the question and figure out the half dozen key variables that played into that. The intellectual property regime, timing always matters, and then critically complementary assets. And I think it's almost true that I introduced the term complementary assets into the economics literature. If you do a word search on it, I don't think you'll find hardly anything or anybody talking about complementary assets until my '86 paper. But obviously now with digital platforms and all of that, everybody's talking complementary assets. And so that's my short answer to your question.
Across sensing, seizing, and transforming, where do firms most often stumble? And what is the single highest leverage corrective action leaders overlook?
Well, first of all, it's not always like a relay where you sense and seize and transform. To some extent, these things, at least in a mature organization, take place or have to take place more or less simultaneously. But to come back to your question, I would say the most visible mistakes are between the sensing and the seizing. So like Xerox at Xerox PARC, invented all of the major elements of the personal computer, the laser printer, the mouse, the GUI interface. Two-thirds of what's in the personal computer today came out of Xerox PARC. And yet they didn't, until it was too late, do a damn thing with it. And if you look at the reason for that, I think management back, the Xerox PARC was out in Palo Alto. The management of Xerox was back in Connecticut, doing M&A activities, a bunch of finance guys running Xerox. And even though somebody in Xerox had the foresight to put the money into establishing Xerox PARC and figuring that the computer industry or computing was going to become central to our economy. The current group of managers that were in Xerox essentially blew it off. Now, it's a bad story for Xerox, but of course the technology then leaked out one way or another. I mean, I even remember I was not smart enough to fully be cognizant of everything, but Xerox, the workers were so frustrated. You went by Xerox PARC after 5 o'clock, you'd get it in 1976 or something or other. You'd get a tour of the laser printer. They'd show you the mouse. They'd show you um, the GUI interface, and of course, a lot of that technology went out, and of course, the Macintosh in many ways is what Xerox was laying the foundation for, and to a limited extent, the Apple II as well, but in particular, the Macintosh. So the technology got out, and society benefited, but Xerox didn't benefit very much at all.
How have platforms and ecosystems reshaped the role of complementary assets and the distribution of profits from innovation?
Well, that's also a very strong question, a very powerful question. Increasingly, economic activity takes place with sort of loose arrangements between complementary firms doing complementary things, and hence we've had to come up with the term ecosystem. No one talked about business ecosystems before the digital platform came along, or there was limited discussion of that. So complementary assets are critical, and the job, of course, of the prime mover, if it's the Apple ecosystem, the job of Apple is to stimulate interest and performance and innovation by all the complements, by leaving enough on the table, but not leaving too much, right? So there's a very critical strategic issue there. But my own view is, if in doubt, leave more rather than less, because if you don't have a robust ecosystem, the whole platform will start to die over time. And I think Bill Gates got close to being a little bit too greedy early on with Microsoft, and let others, benefit from it.
Could you, just for our viewers, could you briefly explain what exactly complementary assets are and how they sort of function within?
Yeah. Well, at the most elementary level, you can think of a vertical supply chain. Manufacturing is complementary to marketing, and research and development is complementary to manufacturing. We've always thought about those levels of complementarity, and the one needs the other, but that's vertical complementarity. Then there's horizontal complementarity, when you need somebody alongside you rather than upstream or downstream from you. That is often what business ecosystems are about. When the first IBM PC, the 360, was produced, the supporting software, and IBM had to make it all itself, had to develop it all of itself. But now if you have an ecosystem, it's done in a very distributed way. So it's all those other things that are necessary to make your product work. And increasingly, sometimes what I call co-specialized, where there's sort of complete dependence between the complementer and the complementee. But generally, if it's an open system, there is not complete co-specialization, and many different players can get in there, and there's competition. So, just think of Uber. I mean, the drivers to some extent are complementers to the app, as well as the automobile companies for that matter. I mean, Uber is basically just an app, but you have a whole system out there that is getting us from A to B. It's a set of complementary assets or subsystems in many cases that get assembled. I mean, when Uber started, they had to go around San Francisco and line up a whole bunch of limo drivers, right? There wasn't a ready market for it. So it got started in San Francisco with 100 or so black cars that Uber went out one at a time and recruited them. And they didn't want to own the business. They don't own the business, but they needed to find partners. So when you have partners, and you typically don't have an ownership shares, we call those, unowned complements, or you could have the complements inside the company too. I mean, these are choices that you make. I think Uber for very good reasons doesn't want to have the drivers as employees. That's a management problem they don't need. And it's also more expensive and less flexible. And having people as independent contractors works better both for Uber as well as for the independent contractors.
What practical diagnostics help managers distinguish routines that exploit the current business from capabilities that renew it for the future?
Yeah, well, R&D, you don't do R&D unless you're trying to renew your business. So companies that are not spending money on new product development, and R&D, of course, is just one of the costs of new product development, are ones that are focused on the present and not on the future. And I'd also say this may seem a little bit counterintuitive. If you're not making a few mistakes with new initiatives that fail, then you're optimizing for the present. You're not thinking about the future, because every time you move into the future, you're dabbling in a world that's ill-defined, where there's deep uncertainty, where you're going to make mistakes. So anyone that's too afraid of making mistakes, a manager that never wants to, oh, I don't want to have a failed project, is going to fail. The firm is going to fail. And so you need boards of directors that understand that. You need management teams that understand that. And, business, particularly in today's world, is about constant experimentation. And of course, you don't want to make mistakes that are so big that they sink the company. But look, every time Boeing or somebody develops a new airplane, they pretty much bet the company investments. It takes, 20, 30, $40 billion or whatever to develop a new airplane. These are really big risks. And of course, Boeing and McDonnell before it and others, they would find ways to shove off some of that risk to their partners, the engine makers and what have you. But anyway, my point is that if you're not taking any risks, then and you're focused on optimization and efficiency, you can always analyze the words. And, one way is to analyze, quarterly investor calls, and you can just sort of look at the vocabulary, what people are saying, the words they're using. They're good clues for me, at least, and it's easy to analyze these days in terms of, are these guys forward-looking, or are they just focused on squeezing the last penny out of what they got right now?
Mm-hmm. So
sadly, too many are doing the latter.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of investors like Warren Buffett or other value investors like seeing that companies don't spend a bunch in R&D. Do you view that as a mistake, or?
I didn't know that Warren Buffett had said that, but yeah, look, I think part of America's problem is we've got a bunch of hedge fund managers out there, and there is enormous profit to be made in the short term by getting control of a company and saying, hey, look, let's cut out the long-term stuff. These guys are short-term players. They're in there for, a couple of quarters, or 3 quarters, or maybe a year. They're not in there for a decade. They're not in there for a generation. And you have this game that you can play where you put pressure on management to do one of two things, cut R&D or do stock buybacks. And this makes things look good. And the analysts are not yet sharp enough to figure out that this is, not good long term for the enterprise. Or if they are, they'll figure out, well, they'll make the adjustment later. But the stock price is going to, go up. And, if you're a management team, you got options, the short-term options. When I say short-term, I mean, even if they're 3 to 5 years, for me, that's short-term in the world of innovation. So we've created a system And I've been starting to write about this, which is favoring short-termism. We got a lot of long-term capital in America, but by the time it gets in the hands of money managers, it becomes very short-term. And when you got these kinds of games you can play, money is attracted to it. They don't care whether it's hurting the company long term. If they can make a buck out of it, they'll do it. So there are some issues, I think, with the way Wall Street is working that are really very complex and hard to fathom. And you need to understand corporate governance. You understand securities law. You need to understand R&D. You need to understand business strategy. Very few people have got their fingers on all of those elements, but there's a big problem there, and I believe that has led to, look at the Boeing debacle, look at the Intel debacle. These are failures of management, and I'm a little bit disappointed with my own profession in business school. I don't see any business professors being critical. They damn well should be, because a lot of other constituencies are losing out because of it. And workers, but the American economy more generally, and it leads to it when you see this going on, it leads to a lack of faith in management too, and it's not good for society, it's not good for the economy, and it's not good for business.
Mhm. So if you were designing a board level dashboard for dynamic capabilities, which three leading indicators would you include and why?
Well, I sort of hinted at that a little bit. I look at it, new product development initiatives. Are you working hard on those, or are you kind of trying to milk what you currently got? I'll be looking at your culture. It's hard to put a firm number on culture, but is there an entrepreneurial culture, and does the culture favor innovation? Is the attitude of the management favor the future or the present? To the extent to which you can quantify those things, I'd have them on the dashboard. And then, I would say, how many failures have you had lately? How much experimentation is going on? Are you just living a comfortable life trying to optimize what you got? Or are you, fully alert? Have you got scouts out on the border thinking about what the competition's doing, or what the next big thing is that's coming your way? If that's not occupying a lot of your time, then you're in the world of ordinary capabilities, and you're doing what I call short-term optimization. You may have a good life for 2 or 3 years, but you're gonna be in trouble pretty soon.
Hmm.
How should companies govern business model innovation differently from product or process innovation? And which decision rights and incentives best support each?
Yeah, well, business models is the way companies go to market. What pricing strategy they have, what outsourcing strategy do they have, what value proposition are they going to put to the customer? Getting these things right. I mean, when you get it right early on, sometimes it'll go for quite a while. You don't have to change it very much, but you constantly have to be alert to refreshing or at minimum tweaking your business model. And some companies never figure out a business model, and they fail. I mean, that's one reason why you don't get, a startup. They don't get to revenues, is they can't figure out the business model, or if they can figure it out, they don't know how to implement it. So, business model innovation in some sense is inexpensive when you're little, but when you're big, changing the business model is structurally very hard. I mean, Xerox copying industry, the business model there was, well, we're going to make money from selling the ink, not the machines, not the paper, but the ink. That was the big profit factor. And Kodak, selling film was key to their business model. And so when digital came along, even though Kodak had pioneered a lot of the digital technologies around photography, they not only stuck too long to digital film, but they thought that where the industry was going to go was towards print. So they doubled down on print, not recognizing that you and I were quite happy to look at things on a screen. And that was a big mistake. Ron Adner at Dartmouth has a paper on this. but sort of figuring out where you're gonna, what you're gonna provide for free as part of the business model. What are you gonna charge for? Are you gonna have a freemium model where you provide some things free and then charge for premium services? In the digital world, that's the way things go. But figuring it out is not easy, but at the same time, experimentation, particularly in the digital world, is not all that costly. You can tweak things almost in real time if you're Apple or if you're Amazon or if you're Google. You can experiment with your business model in real time. In the industrial world, that wasn't possible. It would be wrenching change that you would have to bring about to change your business model. So big companies have trouble changing their business model, and that's why incumbent firms become vulnerable. A lot of people mistakenly think, oh, this company's got a large market share, therefore it's impenetrable. Well, for someone with the same business model, it might be, but for someone with a different business model, it may not be. And so that's what you have to recognize.
So to me, obviously, I'm not a consultant and I don't know too many professional managers, except it seems as though a very easy sort of tangible change or solution that consultants can bring to a company is to fire X amount of people or to cut certain R&D expenses and whatnot. So how can consultants or professional managers be sort of quantifiably useful if they're not super specialized and if they're not just sort of changing around the books?
A very good question. I like to say that I taught MBA students for many years. I can take the bottom quartile of my class and they can come in and figure out an overhead cost reduction plan for you, which is sort of pursuing efficiency things. But to find somebody who can build and create new revenue streams, maybe the top 1% of the class can help do that. So, everyday consultants can tell you how to take costs out, but only the very best can tell you how to create value. And sometimes you need to take costs out. I mean, costs often get out of control. So I don't mean to diminish the value of cost cutting, but if that's all you got, you don't have a future. I like to say you can't cut costs as the way to greatness. You can cut costs to stabilize a company so that you can then think about how to be great. But cost cutting itself is not a path to greatness in 99 times out of 100.
So in settings with rapid imitation and open standards, what strategies beyond formal intellectual property most effectively shift bargaining power toward the innovator?
Well, if there's completely open standards, there can still be, even with open standards, there can still be intellectual property as a difficult way to capture value. So take the wireless ecosystem, mobile wireless. You got Qualcomm. It also makes chips, but for many years, a good chunk of its revenue was licensing its patents that undergirded key wireless innovations. So just because it's open innovation doesn't mean to say that you have no chance of capturing value. But I forgot the rest of your question. In an open innovation world, how do you capture value? Was that it?
What strategies beyond formal intellectual property most effectively shift bargaining power toward the innovator?
Well, if you look at Qualcomm, I think they figured out they got to make some chips as well. And so their modem, the Qualcomm modem is sort of like a key part of their business. So they, having something that people don't pay you for it, you don't give it to them. Where the problem with intellectual property, most people don't realize this with patents. With patents, you actually publish the invention. So people can use it, the invention, without paying you if they so choose. That's called patent infringement. And particularly, when you go outside the United States, like in China, for instance, it's changing some, but a lot of companies just use intellectual property of other companies without paying for it. And unless you can get redress in the courts, there's nothing you can do about it. So the court system is necessary to uphold the patent system. And China's getting a little better at it, but if you're a foreign company, your chances of getting a Chinese court to support you, particularly if it relates to a key industry or a critical industry, is not very good. So, patents can help, but supplying complements, and if you want, you can go back to the age of the gold rushes. Who made money on the gold fields? It often wasn't the prospectors. It was good old Levi's who was making blue jeans, what we call blue jeans, and the guys selling picks and shovels and gold pans. They made steady money, and most people that went in the 49ers in the California gold field, they got nothing. There's a few that got lucky, and that's a little bit analogous to the way innovation goes. A few innovators do well, but the suppliers of the complements are often the winners.
Where do mergers and acquisitions, alliances, and corporate venture investing best fit within asset orchestration? And what are the common pitfalls when firms try to buy rather than build capabilities?
Yeah, very good question. I sometimes say that capabilities can't be bought, they can only be built. Okay. And I think as a general rule, that's pretty good. Occasionally, though, you can buy a capability if you can find a company that has that capability and if you're successful at integrating it and you don't drive the talent away in doing so. And sometimes when it's, a long path to build the capability internally, an acquisition can help you along the way and can give you a leg up. But you got to be really good at it, the integration process. And so it's not just any old acquisition, not just buying a company, it's what you do with the company to husband and cherish the assets that you bought and treat them well and use them effectively.
Through the lens of dynamic capabilities, what separates firms that convert AI pilots into sustained system-wide performance gains from those that stall?
Yeah, well, I think too many people think of AI as just a productivity tool, and I think it's a hell of a lot more. It is a productivity tool, no question about it, but it's also an integration tool. And one of the things that means is I think it means that organizations that grow large, or maybe organizations can grow even larger and be integrated because AI enables you to combine all kinds of data, structured and unstructured alike. So, and I think everybody needs an AI strategy. I think, we're all struggling to really understand the potential with AI. By the way, I have an AI powered digital twin, which I'm now trying to figure out what the right business model is. Maybe you guys can help me because you're the right generation to think about that. I'll send you a number you can call and you can speak to my twin and ask the same questions you put to me. I promise you it'll do a better job of answering them.
So just wondering personally, what company did you make the twin with? Because I have a family member who has a.
What companies am I familiar with?
No, do you have a twin? Like, what company is the twin made with?
Oh, it's a twin of me. It's made by a friend who's a brilliant programmer
I see.
who has got like 200 or 300 software agents working for him. And I think we'll build a state-of-the-art digital twin. We went public on it last week in San Francisco, and I interviewed myself on stage, and the crowd, gave many accolades to the digital twin, none to me, which was the way I was hoping for, what I was hoping for. His
Sorry.
knowledge is superior to mine. His recall is faster. We was trained on, 300 plus of my articles and 25 plus of my books. I've forgotten some of the stuff I've written, but the twin remembers it all and can synthesize it dramatically faster than I can and better. And then what the twin can do is fill gaps in my own knowledge base. And one thing that surprised me, it can provide granularity that I often struggle to provide. Examples on this and examples on that. There's a lot of principles. Dynamic capability is a great framework, and it sort of really lends itself to a digital twin because there's a lot of gap filling the twin can do when you have a framework that's as broad-based as dynamic capabilities. And I'm glad you've been reading about it. At least you've heard about it.
Yeah, one of my family members just or like extended family, but I know him. It just raised, I think, 20 million or something like that with Sequoia for the exact same idea.
Really?
Mhm.
Oh, could you put me in touch with them? I'd love to learn about it.
Yeah,
Is it?
it's called Delphi AI. I can send you after this.
Yeah, Delphi AI. Yeah, okay.
But also, so we speak to a lot of economists and finance professors about AI's effect in the future, but speaking to you as an expert in sort of business management, you would understand how it could be implicated into the workforce more clearly. Are you optimistic or sort of pessimistic about the future with AI in it?
I'm very optimistic. Like anybody that can have like let's just take an AI twin. It really it even improves my own productivity using my own twin. But also using AI in general. If you know how to query it correctly and sensibly, is a big assist. But as I said before, I think my friend Steve Outram, who's developed this twin, believes that the organization of the future, will doesn't necessarily need people. I'm not sure I concur 100%, but certainly needs less people. But then there'll be more other organizations formed. So I'm optimistic that you won't have mass unemployment, but at the same time, we'll all get better at the things we do if we're AI savvy.
Mm.
What analytical tools should competition authorities use to evaluate dynamic and innovation effects in technology and platform mergers?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Looking at, they have to be forward-looking to analyze a merger. A merger, the one thing that competition policy people do they've got to predict. Under the Clayton Act, it really requires you to figure out, what the impact on competition is going to be in the future. So you can look at patents, you can figure out well, let me put it this way. In the past, the agencies have not really looked in a systematic way at capabilities. And so how do you look systematically at capabilities? Well, patenting is one thing that you can look at to get a clue as to the direction of travel of the technologies. But actually, what competition agencies can do if they want to know, what potential competition is like, and who's likely to be a future player. A competition agency can do what's called a civil investigatory demand, and they can go around and subpoena companies and figure out what they're doing. So, a manager you never know what your competitors are doing. You can guess because you don't have inside access, but the government can get inside access pretty easily. So I think being able to do that prospectively and to figure out from that what the emerging technologies are and to figure out who the likely future competitors are. I mean, I think that needs to be much more of a focus than it's been in the past.
Hmm. As industrial policy returns, what is the right division of labor between firm level strategy and national policy in building advantage in critical technologies?
Well, look, I mean, I think we can constantly say we can confidently say the government shouldn't pick winners down at the individual firm level, but we can figure out which are going to be key technologies in the future. And so, you know, there's a pretty good consensus as to what the emerging technologies of the future are, and providing the supporting infrastructure to let those technologies prosper is the role of government, in my view. And I think you can go a little bit further than providing the infrastructure. I think there's room for a limited amount of co-investment. By that I mean, if private industry is willing to put down $10, maybe the government can put down two. In the past, we've always looked to R&D tax credits, which doesn't make any sense for a startup because you don't have any profits, right? So a lot of the things that are used, the tools that are used through the tax system, work when you have an established company, but they don't work for a startup. So we've got to get creative about providing assistance. But I think the most important thing is the infrastructure and skills. I mean, look, as we try to restart the semiconductor industry, we don't have any engineers around that know semiconductors, even though the industry was pioneered in the US. We've got to go back to zero. We've been training lots of foreign students that have taken those skills abroad, but we haven't trained domestic students because, one, there hasn't been a lot of demand because our own companies have located their fabs abroad. And two, if you're that smart, you'll go to Wall Street and, work on some programming trading thing. I mean, that's part of the problem is that it's too easy to make money on program trading and things like that, which don't really generate any significant societal value. So getting the rules of the game right is the most important role for government, in my view.
So lastly, we ask all of our interviewees the same question, which is, how do you define success personally and professionally?
It's through having some kind of positive impact on society. In my case, if I can move the needle with respect to the paradigms that people use for thinking through problems, and when I say move the needle, move it in the right direction, so like in my case, I've got these two big paradigms, dynamic competition and dynamic capabilities, which I've been pushing, particularly on the latter one, dynamic competition, the full one, should I say. I've been pushing on that for 30 years and is finally making headway. And dynamic capabilities sort of took off on its own. It didn't really require me to do anything. I was trying to hold it back because I hadn't fully worked it out and felt it was premature to launch that framework. So for me, success is creating making a contribution that enables people to make better decisions and thereby enriches society and creates a better society. Now, if along the way you can make a bit of money, that's great, but it has to be along the way. And by the way, I'd say the same thing for people that start up companies. Those that go in it to make money, probably not going to succeed. Those that go in with a mission to achieve something great, they're got a much better chance of succeeding. And I don't think the public understands that very well at all. I like to say that companies that maximize profits generally don't or won't. Those that have a mission to accomplish something good for society or for the consumer, they've got a much higher chance.